Number 1. Medieval scholars believed that the earth was flat. Many people think that medieval scholars firmly believed in this idea, but that is a widespread misconception. In fact, many medieval scholars knew and even proved that the earth is round long before modern science emerged. But if even ancient scholars already knew this, where does this myth come from? The idea that medieval scholars believed the earth was flat seems to originate from the 17th century and was spread as part of a Protestant campaign against Catholic teachings. But we can't talk about the flat earth without mentioning Columbus. Another myth related to the flat earth is that Columbus faced opposition in his search for a western route to Asia because people thought he would fall off the edge of the world. In reality, Columbus did face resistance, but not because people thought he would fall off the edge. Instead, they believed he had underestimated the size of the earth and would run out of supplies before reaching Asia. It was not the edge of the world that people feared, but rather the vastness and roundness of the earth, which was difficult to overcome with the technology available at the time. Number 2. Witches in Salem were burned at the stake. If you've ever seen a witch movie, you probably imagine innocent women being burned at the stake while townspeople cheer. But guess what? Not a single accused witch in Salem was burned, not even a little bit roasted. Here's what actually happened. The primary method of execution in Salem in 1692 was hanging, not burning. During the infamous trials in the Massachusetts colony, 19 people were hanged or otherwise executed. One particularly unfortunate man, Giles Corey, was crushed to death under a pile of stones because he refused to plead guilty or not guilty. This guy was literally crushed into the ground by Puritans who kept piling more rocks onto his chest while he refused to confess. His last words? Add more rocks. But where does the whole witch-burning rumor come from? Well, Europe was on a completely different level when it came to witch executions. Over there, they had burnings, drownings, beheadings, and all sorts of other creative medieval torture methods, especially under the laws of the Catholic Church, which saw the process of burning as a form of soul purification. The idea that Salem did the same probably comes from the fact that European and American witch trials have been mixed together in people's imaginations. Number 3. Walt Disney invented Mickey Mouse. Mickey Mouse may be one of the most well-known cartoon characters in history and helped make Walt Disney a major force in Hollywood. However, many origin stories omit the fact that Walt Disney did not actually invent Mickey Mouse. In reality, Mickey was inspired by another Disney creation, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. After Disney lost the animation rights to Universal Studios and was searching for a new star, he turned to animator Ub Iwerks to transform Oswald into a mouse. Iwerks drew Mickey. However, Disney took the credit and even won an Oscar in 1932 for creating the character. Another interesting fact, the famous mouse was originally supposed to be named Mortimer, but this was changed. Why? Because Disney's wife apparently hated the name and suggested another one. Number 4. Neanderthals were dumb. The idea that Neanderthals were stupid and that their inferior intelligence led to their extinction is widespread, but this is far from the truth. They had advanced tools just like early Homo sapiens and were just as skilled in hunting and communication. For example, researchers have shown that Neanderthals may have driven hundreds of bison into a pit in southwestern France. Historic artifacts like jewelry have also been found in Neanderthal settlements. These discoveries suggest that Neanderthals had cultural rituals and symbolic communication. Even though they were not as developed as we are, they were definitely not idiots. Number 5. All gladiators were slaves. Movies like Gladiator and Spartacus have spread the myth that all Roman gladiators were slaves who were forced to fight to the death for the pleasure of spoiled aristocrats. But this myth is more Hollywood than history. In fact, many gladiators volunteered to train in gladiator schools to achieve fame and fortune. Some of these gladiators were former soldiers, famous warriors, or even upper-class Romans who wanted to prove their strength. Many of them trained to wound their opponents rather than to kill them. Moreover, gladiators gained massive fame among the lower social classes. Their portraits adorned the walls of many public places, children played with clay gladiator figurines, and the most successful fighters even endorsed products, just like top athletes today. And by the way, they were not exactly unpopular with the ladies either. Number 6. 300 Spartans defeated the Persian army. This myth flourished in the 21st century when the film depicted the iconic image of muscular men in red capes fighting against a fantastical, overwhelming force. Of course, that's not how it happened, but there is a spark of truth in this myth. It wasn't just 300 men, and they weren't all Spartans. While 300 Spartans were present at the defense of Thermopylae, at least 4,000 allies participated in the first 2 days, and 1,500 men fought in the final battle. And even their heroic victory is entirely fictional. Trapped between the main Persian army and 10,000 men in their rear, the army lost and was ultimately annihilated. So remember, kids, just because you have muscles doesn't mean you can defeat 10,000 soldiers. Number 7. The Trojan horse was a real historical event. There is no real evidence that the Trojan War and especially the Trojan horse ever existed. While the Trojan War itself may have been based on real conflicts between the Mycenaean Greeks and the city of Troy, the whole giant wooden horse story comes from Greek mythology, particularly from Homer's Odyssey and later Virgil's Aeneid. Some historians believe that the Trojan horse may have been more of a metaphor. Perhaps it referred to an earthquake that broke the walls or to spies who sneaked inside the city. I think the best explanation is simply that the ancient Greeks loved drama. Number 8. Napoleon was a very small man. We move from the legendary Trojans to another famous military tactician. Napoleon was about 170 centimeters tall, which was quite average for that time. The idea that Napoleon was small mainly came from the British caricaturist James Gillray, who depicted Napoleon as very short, and other caricaturists followed his example. Imagine creating a comic to mock a national enemy, and you do such a good job that people still believe it centuries later. Even Napoleon himself later said that Gillray had done more than all the armies of Europe to bring about his downfall. Number 9. Marie Antoinette said, "Let them eat cake." This is one of the most famous historical quotes. That's why it may surprise some of you that this myth is completely based on hearsay. For one, it would have been uncharacteristic of the Queen, as she was known for her charity, which included providing food for the poor and hungry. Jacques Rousseau had written a very similar phrase and claimed that a famous princess had uttered these words, but that was long before they were attributed to Marie. Number 10. Shootouts happened all the time in the Wild West. Hollywood westerns constantly show numerous shootouts, where gunslingers draw their weapons in saloons, on the main street, or elsewhere. But in reality, there were far fewer shootouts in the American West. In fact, only a few men wore the typical low-slung gun belts, and the dramatic duels seen in movies were extremely rare. Even the word gunslinger was invented for a Western film in 1920. Armed men in the American West were actually called shootists. But if you like cool Wild West stories, just play Red Dead Redemption. Thanks for watching. See the video on your screen? Well, YouTube thinks this one might interest you as well, so go ahead and check it out if you like.